Good morning, and welcome to the Solid Rock again. I'm Denny Bailey, and this is the Solid Rock online Sunday school class from First Baptist Church in Oxford, Alabama. Thank you for being here today. I'm honored you've decided to join us. Welcome to my home, welcome to our class, and I'm delighted you're here. Today, I want to do things a little bit differently. The title of our lesson is Showing Love, and it's the story of the Good Samaritan as told in the Gospel of Luke as we continue our journey through the Gospel of Luke. Great series of lessons, by the way. But today, instead of using the teacher guide that I usually use, where I get 3 points and a summary, I want to do just the train of thought with David Jeremiah's study guide that he gave us. So let's look at the 10th chapter of Luke as we look at showing love and the Good Samaritan. Now, we're in chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. This is, again, the story of the Good Samaritan. But now, no one in that crowd that was listening to Jesus that day on the hill, no one who listened for days at a time as he gave the story, no one would have called the Samaritan good. You see, the Samaritans and the Jews hated each other. There was a bitter hatred between them. Some 700 years earlier, the northern 10 kingdoms of Judah, 10 tribes of Judah, had been overrun by the Assyrians, and the Assyrians took 20,000 Jews captive and led them off into captivity. They replaced them with 20,000 Gentiles, and over the course of time, and they interacted with each other, intermingled, and they intermarried. So the Jews, who were considered themselves a perfect race, frowned on this, and they thought the Jews were pure race, and here the Samaritan Jews had intermingled and intermarried, and so they called them half-breeds. They hated each other bitterly. The Jews, when they had to travel through the country of Samaria, would go the long way around, one way or the other, to avoid coming through Samaria. So they were bitter enemies. So Jesus told this parable today, and in the parable, he uses a Samaritan as a hero of the story, as a good Samaritan. Well, that would have never flown with the Jews of that day. They wouldn't have understood that parable. They couldn't have applied that to their own lives. But they had to. That was the lesson from Jesus. Jesus taught in parables, and this was a parable he taught. Many parables Jesus taught. They're simple, short stories that illustrate a spiritual truth. And he taught often in parables. Great way of teaching. I wish I could teach more in parables that as Jesus taught. But this is one of his two favorites. The very other of the two favorites are the prodigal son, and I like to call that one the Father Heart of God. But this one is probably the best known of all, and it's called the Good Samaritan. So let's dig into the scriptures today and see what God has got to say to us today about the Good Samaritan. We're in chapter 10 of Luke, verses 25 through 37. I'm going to read the whole story at one setting here. It says in 25, "Behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested Jesus, saying, 'Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?'" Now we see already that his motives aren't pure, because he's not looking to learn from Jesus. He's looking to test Jesus, something he can take internally and then use it back on Jesus at some later point. So he tested him, saying, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?" And he, the scribe, or the lawyer, tested him. The lawyer's better name is a scribe. But he said, he answered and said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You have answered rightly. Do this, and you shall live." But he, the scribe, the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, not only is he trying to test Jesus, but he's trying to justify himself. So trying to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So that's when Jesus tells this parable, tells this story. that's got a great spiritual truth. Simple, down to earth, something they all understood, but it gets across a truth that was deeper, was more hard to understand. And Jesus answered and said in verse 30, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Anyway, you went from Jerusalem, you went down because Jerusalem set up on the mountaintop. And Jericho was 17 miles from Jerusalem, all downhill, many twists and turns and curves. And it covered 17 miles. And it covered a drop of 3,600 feet in elevation. So it was a place that was prone for robbers and thieves. You could go around a curve and be met by thieves who would rob you, kill you, steal from you, whatever needed to be done. So here it is. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came where he was, where the man lying half dead was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Remember the question, who is my neighbor? And he, the lawyer, answered and said, he who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So what a great story. There's much we can draw from and learn from this story. So I want to look at the story. We'll refer back to it in several places, but not as much as we see here. So the characters of this story, that's what I want to really talk about today. You see, the question is, who is your neighbor? Who is my neighbor? Who do I have to do what I have to do to? In other words, we all have a religious inclination in us, but we want to do, humanly, the least we can and still meet our objective. We want to do what we have to do. We want the definition of life clearly defined, but we want the objective to be reached with as little effort as possible. But see, Jesus turned the table on that. He didn't give us just a checklist. You know, we've got a checklist. We can do whatever we think we have to do. We can check this off the list. Obey your father and mother. Okay. We can do this. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not cheat. Do not commit adultery. Do not commit murder. We can check that off. Now, nobody's done that, but we could have. We could check those things off. Nobody has, but we could. But how do you love enough? You see, love doesn't provide a checklist. How do you know when you've loved enough? You see, we have a checklist we can do, but love doesn't allow for that. Love always asks the question, have I done enough? Can I do more? What else can I do? See, love is different. Jesus turned the tables by putting the question, not who is my neighbor, who do I have to love, but am I a loving person? Do I love enough? So that's what we've got in this story. And in this story, we see 4 characters, or 4 groups of people, or 4 individuals. The first group of individuals would be the lawyer who asked the question. That's our story today. Who is my neighbor? How do I love my neighbor? The question is not who, the question is how. So the lawyer became a part of this story when he asked a question. And the question he asked, who is my neighbor? But see, he was just looking for a name to study. Remember, his motives weren't sincere. He was looking for a name to study. He just wanted to know so he could ask Jesus later on. He just wanted to know so he could turn the tables when he got the opportunity. He just wanted to know if he had met the checklist again. So this was a man who tested Jesus. All right, who the second group of people in this story? The second group of people would be the thieves. They weren't looking for a name to study. They were looking for a nobody to slaughter. They were looking to kill this man. They weren't looking for somebody of influence, somebody who they could trick. They just wanted to get a man by himself out and beat him half to death and take what he had. So they were looking for a nobody to slaughter. You see, there were 40,000 construction workers that had just been released from work by King Herod. They no longer were going to be paid. He fired them. He essentially sent them on their way. So many of them had to resort to whatever they could to make money to survive. And many on this Jericho road became thieves. So their theft was to survive, maybe. So they were looking for a nobody to slaughter. Here we see Jesus taking the lesson out of the synagogue and putting it on the streets. It was not a debate to Jesus. It was a lifeline. It was how you lived, how you survived, how you stood. So it made him where the rubber meets the road. All right, so the next group of people we see are the priest and the Levite. Now the priest was a temple leader. He led in worship. He would be a pastor, we would refer to, or a preacher today. He led in worship. But they had so many priests in that day that they had to divide them into groups. And there were groups that made 24 different groups. And you got to serve 2 weeks of the year. So you went to your temple and served, went to the temple and served for 2 weeks. And that was your year's service. And people, the men or the priests were from the tribe of Levi. So they really enjoyed and loved doing this. This was the highlight of their year, was to serve those 2 weeks in the temple. And then he says he went by him, saw the man laying naked and beaten and bleeding and nearly dead on the side of the road. And he passed him by. Now, why would he do that? Well, maybe he was heading for his 2 weeks worth of service. Maybe he was going to the temple to get his 2 weeks in. And if he touched a dead body, if this man died and he had touched him, he would be unclean for 7 days. He would be isolated and couldn't interact. Certainly couldn't go into the temple and certainly couldn't lead in worship in the temple. So he passed him by. Along behind him came a Levite. Now, a Levite also was a temple worker. He was a temple servant. He set the stage for worship. He was knowledgeable in what had to be done. He was a person who was a master of religious worship. Maybe he had seen the priest go by. Maybe he said, well, if the priest went by, there must be nothing I can do for him, so I'll go by too. The priest, however, may have looked back and saw the Levite coming and said, well, I'll leave it to the Levite to take care of him. I've got to get to the church. I got a committee meeting to go to, so I've got to be there. Maybe he thought there was nothing he could do. Maybe he thought there was the other one could take care of him. But these two men prove a great truth for us. Religious work does not make one religious, not make a worker religious. Religious work does not make one religious. They were good men. They were involved in their church. They did what God wanted them to do. They were serving. They were doing what they thought was most important, but it was not the most important thing. What does Micah 6:8 say? Micah 6:8 says, there are 3 requirements. What does the Lord require of you, O man? But to do justly, to do the right thing, to love mercy, to be compassionate, and to walk humbly with your God. So God was willing for us to do these things, and he gave us those commands. What was the right thing to do? It would have been to stop and help the man. What would have been the compassionate thing to do? Stop and help the man. So they didn't do what they should do. I had a dear friend one time, he's gone now, a long time ago, named Buster Devine. Buster would come, he was a Sunday school teacher, and he would come to my Wednesday teacher class. I taught a Wednesday class on preparing teachers to teach, and Buster would come. Now, Buster was old in those days, and he was not very healthy. And he would come, and when he got up to leave, he struggled to get up out of that chair. I had to help him up out of the chair. His wife, who came with him, she was a teacher as well in another class. She would go get the car while I led Buster out. But Buster would tell me a story, and he told it more than one time. It was heavy on his mind, especially as he got older. He said that one day, a long time ago, a long time before, he was driving to church to work on a benevolence committee. That was one of his duties, was to serve on the benevolence committee to help others. What an irony, he says. I saw on the side of the road a car that was stopped, and I knew that car. I knew the driver. He was a member of my church, and he needed help. But I was late for this benevolence meeting. And in the hurry of the moment, he said, I looked the other way and I acted like I didn't see him, and I drove by him and went on to work at church to work on my benevolence committee. And evidently that really stayed with Buster. It was on his mind many times. He told me that story several times. And I always thought, what a great story, but what a memory to have, to remember that one time when you failed to do what was most important. He failed to do justly, and he failed to love mercy. And in essence, he failed to walk humbly with his God. We've got to have compassion. The priest and the Levite failed to have compassion. They failed to do what was necessary to do. So they went on. But then we come to the Samaritan. The Samaritan was a neighbor to serve. He wasn't a person. He wasn't a name to study. He wasn't a nobody to slaughter. He wasn't a nuisance to shun like the priest and the Levite did. He was a neighbor to serve. And that's David Jeremiah's great truth in this lesson. We need to be a neighbor. If we're looking for who our neighbor is, it's someone we can serve. How can we serve? Now, what did the Samaritan do? How did he work? He was this, to this day, we're reminded of the good that the Samaritan did. Have you ever heard of a Good Sam or a Good Samaritan hospital or clinic? Most big cities have one. So while the Jews hated the very thought of a Samaritan being the hero of the story, today we still honor and revere the Good Samaritan who helped the man on the side of the road. We see those in campgrounds particularly, and in even there, I think there's a camper called the Good Samaritan. Good camp. Maybe it's just a campground that's called that. Good Sam Campground. But that's how that's how the Samaritan is remembered today for his goodness. All right, so what are some things we can learn from that? We learned that the Samaritan stopped and helped him. What did he do? He touched him. He put oil and wine on his wounds. He bandaged him. He put him up on his donkey and steadied him as they rode into the next community where there was an inn and he could leave the man. And he paid for the inn for the man. And he said, do what else you need to do for him. And whenever I come back through tomorrow, I'll take care of whatever else you've spent to take care of him. So he remembered him in love. What all the things did he do? He had compassion on him. Jesus was a role model to the Samaritan. Jesus had compassion on people, and it was usually a physical need that he saw in them first. But he did what Jesus did. He touched the man. I remember our story just a couple of weeks ago was about a man who had leprosy, and Jesus touched him. It was forbidden to touch a leper. You could catch the leprosy. It was contagious in some cases. So Jesus touched him. And this man touched the man who had been beaten and robbed. The victim was touched. He had demonstrated care for him, not only contact, but physical care. And we noticed the cost that he paid. He paid 2 denarii. He offered to pay more when he came back if more had been needed. So he took care of the man. His love was documented by compassion and care. And he also was demonstrated by cost. He paid what was necessary. So what are the lessons we can learn from this lesson? We learn that the secret of love is not found in a religion. The priest and the Levite showed us that wasn't the answer. It's not found in a responsibility. The lawyer asked, who is my neighbor? I want to do the minimum I can do and still go to heaven, still be right with God. We don't find love in a responsibility. We don't find it in religion. The secret to loving is found in a relationship. It's a relationship with Jesus that starts there and then goes out from us to those around us. We imitate Jesus in his efforts. We're a disciple who follows our leader, and we follow him by doing what he does. It's a wonderful, wonderful lesson today. David Jeremiah sums it up by saying this. He says, do all the good you can to all the folks you can in all the ways you can in all the places you can for as long as you can for Jesus' sake. So what a great story. What a great lesson we can learn from this. That's what God expects of us. It's not a minimum requirement. Do what God expects of us as we love our neighbor as ourselves. Thank you for being here today. I'm delighted you joined me today. I appreciate your presence. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week.